Welcome to the LibreQuest podcast. My name is Matt. This is episode 41, and today I'm joined by a gaming commentator, Linux user, and content creator, Dark1. How are you, sir?
Not too bad, Matt. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Well, I really enjoy listening to your videos. I appreciate your straightforward and honest take on different issues in regard to Linux and gaming. And I want to start by asking what first got you into gaming, and what's the first game that you remember playing?
Oh, geez. I'm going to probably start showing my age, unfortunately. So my first game that I personally remember playing was the track and field game and like Duck Hunt and that stuff on a NES. But I also do remember playing certain games on an Atari. Oh, man. 5200. What was that for the 52? Either way, it's been so long since it was one of the later Atari edition, 7600, I think. And I remember playing things like Pitfall, and that, using the joystick controllers and that kind of stuff. So those are my first gaming memories that I actually remember. So yeah, I guess those would be the first games and consoles and kind of that kind of stuff that I've actually played and whatnot. So I guess I'm really, really showing my age at this point.
It's awesome, man. It's awesome. Yeah, I never really played Atari, so I'm not much help when it comes to like what iterations they actually had. But my next question is, how did you get introduced to Linux?
Again, short version, long version, either one.
The long version. Long version is always the best.
So I really got into computers around 98, 99. For those that don't understand those dates, that's pre-2000. So I had gotten a machine that I had built, and one of my friends came home from school, and he had this, I can't remember if it was Red Hat or Mandrake disk. It was one of the two, and I don't remember right off the top of my head which one it was. I think it was Mandrake. And he was like, hey, you're having all these Windows issues because this is a Windows ME computer. So we'll go with that. And we ended up nuking and paving the Windows ME install off this, weird kind of hacky built machine that I had. And that was probably the first experience with Linux. And let's just say Wintel modems back in 98 and 99 were not a fun time if you were a Linux user. So for those that want to complain about current, modems and Wi-Fi drivers and all the other stuff, go back about 20 years, long list of progress we've made.
Yeah, absolutely. That was I had a similar first experience with Linux. I started a Mandrake 7.2, and I had a Windows Millennium Edition system. It was my first brand new computer that I bought, and that's what I did. I just nuked it off of there, nuked Windows Millennium Edition, because it was terrible in comparison to 98. I don't know what you thought about it.
If you wanted your operating system to always display a blue screen, go use Windows ME.
Yeah, it's just a horrible experience. But yeah, the getting online was quite difficult. For sure. I remember I had a US robotics modem that I used to get online, and it was the only one that would work. I don't even think their internal worked, but they had an external one that hooked into your printer port. I believe it was. For those that don't know, that's the serial port, which is the big old thing that we don't have anymore. Yeah.
Yep.
We still need those. They're like expansion cards with those on there. It's awesome.
You're starting to sound like Nate from DL and Extend, who likes to talk about Amigas and all the other stuff and Commodore 64. So just saying.
I do think it would be kind of cool to have some sort of like modern like USB-C Thunderbolt or something where you could just have all these old school interfaces for like old hardware. I don't know, it'd be kind of cool.
Something tells me somebody's probably made it at this point.
I hope so. That'd be awesome.
Do note the next thing we're going to be looking on Amazon is USB-C to serial port adapter.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the current state of the Linux desktop, just the experience in general, and how you think it compares to your past experiences on the Linux desktop.
Well, passing, we'll kind of go backwards with this. So, past experiences in comparison, we've come a long way. So, as an example, I recently bought a new to me machine. I got a Toshiba Portage Z20T, I believe is the actual model number. It's a, M5, Intel M5, which is like the fanless design Intel processors, 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SSD, but it's a 2-in-1. If you went back to try to install, say, that first version of Linux I tried back in 99 on a machine like that, that would have been the most horrible experience ever. It literally took me 10 minutes, not counting burning the USB of image of Garuda to to the USB and booting the machine, and then just telling it overwrite Windows 10. That was it. The keyboard works, all the USB ports work, all the touch screen works, the pen works. Even when you disconnect the tablet portion from the base, automatic keyboard pops up. Everything just works. So I really can't complain about stuff not working. It does. It have problem areas still to this day. Yes. Anytime AMD launches a new video card, good luck getting it to work on Linux. There were some initial issues with the Ryzen platform as a whole when it came out on Linux, when it came to the CPUs and stuff. But a lot of those, from what I've seen anyway, have been ironed out. Dual GPUs, integrated and dedicated on like a laptop or any of that kind of stuff. Still hit or miss. It's a lot better now with things like Prime. If you're a NVIDIA user, you can actually go into, I believe, the Xorg settings and change it so that Prime kind of actually understands when to be used and when not to. A lot of the distros have made GPU switching really easy, like Pop! OS. There's apps like Optimus Manager Qt, which makes it very easy to, hey, I only want to use the NVIDIA driver. Hey, I only want to use X driver every time you boot. Stuff like that has made it really, really easy. But to say we don't have pain areas is kind of disingenuous. Like, look underneath Pulse Audio and try to figure out what the sound system is.
Right. Yep.
And unfortunately, we're in this weird area where we're in transition. We have things like Pipewire that are supposed to be replacing Pulse and also and all the other stuff. Then we have other things like Wayland. That's supposedly at some point, and it's already been over a decade, that is supposed to replace Xorg and all this other stuff. And it's every time there's a transition, there's always turbulence. But then again, you can say that about any OS, because look at the transition from Windows XP to someone who went to 7, or someone who went from even XP to Vista, the train wreck that was. Talked about going from Windows 7 to Windows 8, Windows 7 to Windows 10, or the disaster that's not looking too hot right now for Windows 11. So for me, I don't see any more problems than I normally would on something like a Windows platform. Windows still has issues with high DPI. Linux still has issues with high DPI. It all depends on what you view as a quote unquote issue for your OS.
Yeah, I've actually, you were talking about Prime, and my experience with Prime is it worked really well. Honestly, I had a laptop with NVIDIA and Intel graphics, and yeah, that Prime actually worked quite well. So I mean, like you're saying, I think every time we see like an improvement, like you mentioned Pulse Audio. every time there's an improvement, it always comes along with its own problems, but it's better than what we had before. It's still, in my opinion, it's still typically better than what we had before because the support is so much better, but yeah, it always comes along with its own issues and new problems. Maybe not as bad as the old problems, but there's still new problems introduced.
Yeah, so like the Pulse Audio thing, like go back to 804, I believe was the first Ubuntu that I remember shipping with Pulse. That thing was that sound system Substack was a train wreck for Pulse. Like you would literally plug in your headphones. It would continue to play through the speakers and the headphones. You'd unplug you would unplug the headphones, and then the sound would just stop, like altogether. Like your system had no sound.
Yeah,
it was. But the problem was, if you looked at before Pulse, you had OSS, you had open sound system for the I don't mean open source software in that regard for that particular piece. You had Jack, and so to say that there hasn't been iterative improvements would be really disingenuous. But yeah, it takes those iterative improvements. I mean, Pulse really only, let's be honest, really only got good probably over the last 4 or 5 years. Like really got good. Like as far as not being buggy as a holy mess.
Yeah. It's, I mean, it's there's always going to be, improvements, and there's always like the pain point. Do you have any other, just out of curiosity, because you got me thinking about this, do you have any other complaints that really stand out? Because I was watching a video, I think it was yesterday actually, and they were outlining complaints that they had about Linux. I was like, that's interesting. I should ask people about what their complaints are, because I know everybody has them, but I don't know.
My complaints or whatever. My complaints really aren't with Linux per se. Some of it's ignorant perception of Linux. People who try to talk knowledgeably about it, but are factually generically wrong about it. Like I can't right click on this and tell it to open, say, GNOME disk if you're in GNOME. Like that, now you right click on the thing that automated and tell it to format it, opens GNOME disk. Like it's not rocket science. That's more of a perception problem. That's not really a problem per se. Linux's marketing is definitely needs some work. I think that would help the perception problem there. But really the biggest thing I just have a problem with is kind of there's a difference between constructive arguing or, quote unquote criticism, if you want to call it that, and just coming to the approach that I'm right, you're wrong, regardless. And far too often I've seen that I'm right, you're wrong, and anything you say doesn't matter is not going to help in pushing something forward. And again, that's more of a community thing. I don't know really where to place that, but some of these weird technological arguments about system D versus
that's exactly what I was thinking.
System D arguments about it's 2 million lines of the Linux kernel, or then you got I don't know if you need to edit. You got random people who think they have an overinflated opinion of themselves, which FYI I do not. They think that, hey, this project has too many lines of code. Okay, cool. Have you actually factually looked at the actual breakdown of code? If you're gonna say something's gonna die, I'm just gonna say 3 million lines of code. Take away all the stuff that was removed. You got about 1,680,000 something lines of code. You had 4,189 developers that contributed code to the kernel at the end of 2019. That's 400 lines of code to maintain per developer.
Right.
So if you're looking meta, which you like people like that claim to do, if you're looking meta and you say that's not sustainable, then you're the one that is not looking at stuff from a meta angle. You're looking at it from only your angle.
Yeah, that's fair. So your example is the kernel is too what? Too
bloated,
too bloated.
quote unquote.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of the bloated argument on stuff, and I guess it makes sense. I mean, depending on your system or how you like to maintain it or your resources that you have available and that sort of thing. That's kind of in my mind. So I understand the argument there, but you're saying that it's the argument against something that's bloated being unmaintainable, like something like the kernel.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's a viewpoint that you take only because that's the viewpoint you want to take without actually objectively looking at it, what's there, even though you're claiming to do the 1,000-mile view kind of overlook. Okay. And I think it's things like that kind of disingenuous arguing really irks me. But that's more of a development community kind of thing, not so much just strictly Linux, but it does relate to Linux because the community is part of Linux.
Right. And we see that a lot, especially like if you've been observing or if you've been using a Linux operating system for a long time, you see that there's always these forks, or there's somebody that does a derivative work, which eventually becomes a fork or its own thing. And, these things just always split off. And it's usually over something like, is there too much code? Is it too... is there too much going on here to maintain? Is it unnecessary or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
It's just whatever the argument might be. But, so we see a lot of the forking and stuff. And you were talking about marketing. And I was actually wondering, does it make Linux as a solution, other than something like a Chrome OS or an Android, does it make it, more do you think that makes it more difficult to market because of that aspect of the licensing and stuff?
It's not even the licensing.
Well,
if you just strictly look at the term Linux, there is a negative connotation amongst the general public. Now, I'm not talking about those in the tech field and all the other stuff. Like, they have a different understanding. Most, I'm going to restructure this, have a different understanding of what Linux and the OSs and versions of it that are around entail. Most, not all. So, if you tell a end user, like a generic end user, oh, I use Solus. Well, okay, anybody in the know on the Linux end will be like, oh, okay, so that rolling curated kind of distro, that's what you use. Cool, whatever. But if you tell them, oh, hey, I use Debian, they're not going to care. They don't know what the heck that means. So it's a marketing thing where it's like, to me, it means you don't have to necessarily say, oh, well, we disregard the Linux portion. It's you have to change the perception of it. And there's nobody doing that at all. Instead, we embrace the stupid perceptions.
Well,
so as an example, everything's got to be done from the CLI. That is legitly 90% of the arguments that you hear anytime anybody mentions Linux to a novel.
Yeah.
Go use Discover, go use App Center, go use Add Remove, go use Octopi, go use POMAC, insert GUI based application here. Yeah. You don't have to do it. So it's a perception problem that, quite frankly, a lot of the community really don't want to fix.
Well, my perspective on marketing is like, we've seen Linspire that was launched in the early 2000s, and I believe they got pretty viciously sued by Microsoft. And we saw Mandrake Linux, they were on the store shelves. That was my first OS, and they also had their company Mandrake Soft. Well, of course, they got sued by Microsoft as well. So not to mention they were very heavily proprietary. So I think it depends on like where you're coming from in the argument. Does it need to be heavily commercial? If it is heavily commercial, does it need to be heavily proprietary to work in in that kind of a market? And then does that even matter to somebody who's just really all about the free software side of things? You know, what do you think on that?
The pragmatism versus the philosophy
Yes.
argument,
Yes.
essentially. God. I'm going to have a controversial take. Oh, God, novel surprise.
Yes, please.
So I tend to be the pragmatist. So when I hear things like, "Oh, this is a bloated proprietary OS," you hear a lot of things about distros that include like the NVIDIA stuff, or stuff to make your Wi-Fi work, or insert whatever piece of hardware or code that makes your machine potentially work. That ships by default. Or this distro ships with codecs, and I know that's not as big of a thing as it used to be, but it's still a thing. And to me, it's one of those, where does your stop thinking about you, and where does the user, the person you're giving a potential distro to, where do they fall? What's their use case? Hey, if you want to go free software only, and you don't want a system D, hey, go use Dev1. Totally up to you. If you want to go, no proprietary blobs, all the stuff removed, go use the Libre version of the kernel, and go use Triskel, and dig through the nonsense of trying to actually get a machine to work that runs it. That's all your prerogative. Don't care. For me, I'm more of the, we talk about choice and freedom and all the other stuff. I see a lot of people trying to beat freedom into people when people just view freedom as choice.
Yeah, and I think that is true, because most people will come back with, if you talk about software freedom or the GPL or GNU, and you bring this up, you say software freedom, and they say, well, I want the freedom to be able to choose to run whatever I want, even if it's proprietary. And I think a lot of people have that view. And so, when it comes to like marketing or commercial, I mean, it's almost necessary that it has to be something that's extremely proprietary, because a company is going to want to sell something that's proprietary. So I think, I don't know. I mean, and then it ends up in a lockdown system, if it is successful, like we see on Chrome OS or we see on Android, and then it's just not the same system. So I'm kind of wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's the potential there for, GNU Linux to become something that is heavily used or sold by OEMs on a larger scale than we see with like Introware or System 76 or, Pogo Linux or someone like that?
I think you're starting to see it with other companies starting to ship it. Dell's been very open about they invested a few million. They've had multiple times returned on that. Scale wise, are we ever going to compete on, we're 20-30% of the market? No, I don't. Because really, if you look at computing, what you and I view as like real computing, quote unquote, is totally different than what the newer, younger generation, how they interact with computers. Because the computers they interact with, it's all in their hand.
Yeah.
It's either a smartphone, it's either a tablet, or any of that kind of stuff. That's how they interact with it. And I'm not going to lie, a lot of us who are were around pre 2000s, or maybe the early aughts, like early 2000s, our perception of what a computer is very different.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think, for me, I think we're framing the narrative wrong as to, is there ever going to be the quote unquote traditional year of the Linux desktop? Are we ever going to? No, because the desktop is an ever shifting demographic and target.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I see your point, and I think Dell's a really good example, because they've been shipping Ubuntu machines for quite some time, at least since 2008, as far as I can remember, and they've continually done that. It's an option. Even FreeDOS has been an option with them. So, they do. That is a commercial business that does provide that as an option, and people actually order their machines for Ubuntu. So I think that's a fair example.
And the problem is, like, people will be like, "Oh, well, you can only get Ubuntu." reality flash, you can't support every distro.
Right.
That's just reality. Because here's the secret a lot of the Linux users won't talk about to me is every version of GNU / Linux, Linux OS, Linux based OS, whatever you want to terminology you want to use for it, they're all different operating systems. They just have the same core.
Yeah, this is true. Yep, they share a kernel and probably a lot of applications, utilities, but yeah, they're different.
Yeah, but some versions might run a different version of libgc. libgcc. Some might run, an LTS kernel versus a bleeding edge kernel. Some might Garuda Linux, which is one of the distros I use the Zen kernel instead of any of the normal kernels. So they're all different. Yeah, they're all tailored. So to lump them all together and say, "Oh, it doesn't support X," it's like, then you're not being realistic about what, like, a company with even as many sources as resources as a company like Dell would have. They have to see an ROI. It's a business. You might not like that idea, but it's a business, and there are return of investment has to, matter.
Yeah, and I think from the free software side of things, because a lot of people, that's the reason that they use a Linux operating system, right? Is because it's free software, and that's always been like my kind of thought process is the year of the Linux desktop. To me, that says commercial success, but we even see like at the distro level with things like Snap, where they're including things that are proprietary that are available. And a lot of people have an issue with that. But in my mind, it's kind of like, well, if it's about the commercialization, that's kind of has to come along with it, at least in my mind, so. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there, but I think as far as like the year of the Linux desktop thing, I don't know. I think to me, it's like whenever you start using it on your desktop, for you, that's the year of the Linux desktop.
That is totally 100% the way I see it too. It is literally when were you able to, not necessarily potentially, everyone's got a reason for potentially keeping something, be it a Windows, a Mac, whatever. We all have different, I have a few Android phones. I have a Mac. I have, a Windows machine. It's one of those, we all have reasons for keeping certain things. It's like, for me, it became, well, when can I do most of my primary computing on Linux? Like that was my goal. Yeah. And that didn't really happen until like 2012 until Steam came out, and I was like, hey, I can play about a third of my games. I can play about a third of my games on Linux now, and I don't have crappy drivers.
Did you ever have the experience of running Steam in Wine?
Yes, and I hated every minute of it.
Yeah, I didn't know any better. I'm kind of like, when I hear people talk about things that don't work on Linux yet, I'm like, well, if it's not available, I don't even know I'm missing it, But that's how I gamed. I would run Steam in Wine if I wanted to play a title that didn't work on Linux. And even if the frame rate was terrible, I didn't even know about it. I was just like staying ignorant of it.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, and I guess for me, it's always just been one of those. When it became your primary platform, that's really how you should determine what was the year of the Linux desktop. And it's not like this big grandiose moment. It might be a big grandiose moment for you personally, but not in the way that the traditional narrative for it has been framed of like, we're gonna kick Windows butt. And it's like, nah, it's not how you got to look at it.
Well, I know you had done a video about switching over to primarily using Linux, but still having for certain things using the a Windows machine. And I'm kind of wondering, like, and I mean, you kind of frame it, and you need to know these systems to be able to do what you do, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, kind of what is your experience like at the moment? Like, I know you're primarily on Linux, but what are the things that you still require, like Windows or Mac, in order to do that you can't currently do on Linux?
So, as far as Windows, I have a 1,000+ game library. I'm sorry that's I'm not dropping $10,000 to $15,000 worth of games simply based off an ideology. That's a bad investment of my time and money, and I don't have a lot of time and to waste, so I'm not going to jump through hoops to get stuff to play that might potentially not, or is just outright broken. Like, so for the stuff that doesn't work on Proton and I'll be the first to say, I don't even advocate for using Lutrus. Like, I'm not a fan.
Tell me why. Tell me why you don't like Lutrus.
I gotta preface this because I like the project. I like what they're attempting to do. I like all of that. I'm more about user experience. And when I mean user experience, Linux people need to understand, I'm not talking about just the pointy clicky UI part. I'm talking about the overall using of a system. Lutrus introduces too many different variables and avenues of something breaking to give a good user experience.
Yeah, I'd say I've used Lutrus in the past, and my experience was, it was like I could download a profile for a title, and I was, just giving it a try. Like, it didn't work on Proton at the time, so I was like, well, I'll give Lutrus a try, and of course it did work. But I ended up going through a bunch of profiles, and they're still there, and I don't know what to do with them. And like, I'm not sure how it's working on the back end, and there's a lot of different options in there to tweak, and I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. So I think Lutrus could definitely be more intuitive as far as like the user inside of things, for sure.
Yeah. And that's really where I view it as. I'm not saying it can't work. It doesn't work. I'm just saying, to me, to recommend something, it has to lower the barrier of entry, not add more layers to it.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, hey, you're a Windows user and you want to move to Linux for these titles. Well, go use Lutrus. I don't know that I would feel comfortable doing that because, honestly, I'm not that experienced with it. But it feels like there would be a lot of instructional time that it would take to actually get somebody up and running on it.
It's not even that. So, like, what I mean by too many different avenues is, so example, if you install the Epic Store instead of using maybe the Heroic Launcher or, Legendary or whatever, this is just an example. But if you decide to straight up install the Epic Game Store, well, if the Epic Game Store updates and it breaks, where are your games? You can't. Yeah. How long are you going to wait for the fix? How long are you going to wait for that script that they use to be updated? How long are you? It's a waiting game.
Yeah. So that's like not just the usability, but the stability.
It's the uncertainty.
Yeah.
So like there was a person I know that tried to get their wife onto Linux, and they tried installing WoW, World of Warcraft, one of the most popular MMOs out there. Guess what? They couldn't get to work.
Did they try Lutrus?
And they tried Lutrus.
Yeah.
Because for some, they could get WoW Classic to work, but they couldn't get WoW, the actual current version of WoW at the time to work. And that's the thing. It takes one update to work a WoW game or, insert whatever service type of you're going to use.
Are you a WoW player?
No.
Okay. I was going to ask if it works. It's like, I was curious now.
No, for those that want to know, the only I'm more of a single player game kind of guy. Generically, I'm not a people person. Novel idea. Go watch some of my content and you'll figure out that. For me, I'm more of the only like MMO type game that I'll play is Warframe.
Yeah, I'm not really good at those games, so I don't even know. I've heard the title. I've heard that title, but I'm not really familiar with it.
Low barrier to entry because it's a free to play game, but it doesn't feel like it's pay to win because it's not, because you can still get everything in game.
Cool. Yeah.
That to me is the ideal balance.
Yeah.
There's grinding. Don't get me wrong, but it's not for anybody that's played PlanetSide 2. It's not PlanetSide 2 level grinding.
Yeah, modern gaming is a bit frustrating for me because a lot of it is so centered on being online in order to play with other people. And then even if you set up like a local LAN, I guess that's redundant, isn't it? Local LAN. But if you set up a LAN, you still have to connect to their servers in order to LAN. It's like that makes no sense to me. Like I enjoy far more the like solo, just playing the game and experiencing it that way. Like it's like maybe it's old school at this point,
I'm definitely in the minority because I'm very much a single player game kind of person.
Yeah, it's more enjoyable to me.
Yeah, give me a good story, something that takes me out of, just give me a good story, give me some good gameplay. I don't need the prettiest graphics. I mean, crap. One of my favorite games is a game called Dex, which is like a 2.5D cyberpunk open world, side-scrolling, action RPG. Like it's the weird, but it's like 16-bit. So it's like with the most weird esoteric game. But I probably have 60 hours in the game, and it only takes me 10, 15 hours to beat it. That means I've beaten this weird indie game that I spent $1 on 4 different times.
Yeah, have you played Dying Light?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I like that game. That's actually fun for co-op. At one point, I had like a whole like 4 or 5 machines set up, and when like my family would be there, like my nephews and stuff, we would play. It was just a fun. Co-op is a little different. I like co-op. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Even for a LAN or internet play is kind of awesome. So I like that aspect of it. But like moving to these. They've been around forever, but it seems like they've really taken over these massively multiplayer games.
Yeah, everyone's got to have an MMO, or it's got to be a survival game.
Yeah, yeah. I was looking at there was a game that came out. I don't remember when it was. I don't remember the title either. It was like a zombie game, and I was like, this might be fun on a LAN. And then I look into it, and it's like you have to connect to their server to play on your local network.
Was it probably? It might have been DayZ, probably.
Yeah. I think it was. Yep. So I'm just curious. Do you have any do you have any top games, like recent games that perform well on Linux that are new titles from this year?
Not necessarily from this year.
Okay, last year. That's fine too.
Well, I have top games that I know will work that are. I'm trying to think of a way to word that. That are considered AAA, by some, and some won't. Like if that's kind of the list you're looking for. For me, though, because I'm more of a single player game kind of guy, most of mine are going to be kind of more esoteric games. One of my favorite games that I like is it's a Japanese RPG, which is Tales of Berseria. I'm not necessarily bad at fighting games, but I'm not great. But I do enjoy the genre. And some of my favorite games are like King of Fighters 14, I believe. And Guilty Gear, Exerd, Revelator, Rev 2, second, whatever version of the prior version of Guilty Gear was. Those all work perfectly fine on Linux. So the multiplayer works, all that stuff works. So those are some of like my genre games that I like to play. But I mean, you have your Mad Max, your Shadow of the Tomb Raider, you have Deus Ex, Mankind Divided, you got Civilization. If you really want to get into Linux gaming, and if you see if I can word that right without swearing.
That's fine.
If you really want to get into Linux gaming, you have to flip the mentality on Linux gaming. You can't view it as a drop-in replacement for quote unquote PC Windows gaming. You have to view it more in the mentality of a console game.
Yeah.
So there are going to be things that work, and there are going to be things that don't. As an example, I don't go to a Switch and expect PS4 games. Like, PS4 exclusives. I don't. So why are you going to take that mentality to a system that we have I'll be generous and say probably 65% because I don't think 70 is 100% accurate. You have 60 to 65% of the entirety of the Steam library that we know of is gold or higher on ProtonDB. So that means it's working in some way, shape, or function without either a lot of tweaking.
Yeah, that's amazing though. I mean, just
And
that.
these are all games that are built on a system and running on a system they're not designed for.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, it's a different platform, completely different platform. It's
So,
true.
and I get kind of annoyed when people, approach Linux gaming as like this drop-in replacement, and it's like, the people who say what you want about Mac hardware, but that same logic isn't applied when they go and run, Steam on Mac.
Yeah.
So why are you applying it to Linux? Just because it has the potential ability to do it?
So I got a question for you because these are good points, but you brought something up. I'm kind of curious about it. Did you ever get into the Steam consoles?
Technically, I would say, I guess you could say technically I have one, but
Okay.
I'm running. I have I guess, it's a dual boot system. My workstation machine, it runs Salient OS, which is an Arch-based distro, as my production machine, ironically, and I have a Gamer OS drive that I use on there too, which I believe is currently in the process of being shifted to called Chimera OS, if I remember.
And what is that based on? I'm not
That's
sure.
it's based on Arch, like in the way it's set up. So Gamer OS is kind of set up in I guess the best way to explain it is if anybody understands the way Endless OS is set up or the way Fedora Silverblue is set up.
Okay.
So like a lot of like the core system is read only. So things like you would have to pull in things like Flatpaks and that kind of stuff. Like it's very different. It uses a system, I believe it's FZR, if I remember. I can't remember the exact. I think it's FZR as like the file system. It has continued rolling updates every month. It has different ways to import different emulators and that stuff through an app called Steam Buddy. It's a very different project, but it's a consoleized version. It's the thing Valve should have been doing. Sell your PCs as a console, and there's your message.
Yeah. Yeah, that whole thing confused me when they did the console thing because it was literally just a weird piece of hardware and you could put any operating system on it you want. It's like that's not really what a console is, but they should have just I don't know. It was just kind of weird. Because the hardware was really cool because it was so small. You could put it in your entertainment center or whatever. But they kind of I don't know. Have you used the Steam OS recently?
Not generic Steam. So Gamer OS, as an example, runs the default UI is Steam Big Picture mode.
Oh, interesting.
So
Yeah.
Gamer OS is what I would consider a updated, maintained continuation of Steam OS.
Is that their goal, the project goal?
It is. One of the cool things that they have, how Valve originally came out with like the whitelist of like supported games, quote unquote.
Yeah.
They do that, but on a much more continuous basis. So like one of the games that I was able to help get whitelisted. So like when you go over all the way over to your right and enable Steam OS games or, Steam Play Certified, I believe is what they're actually called. When you go in there and you click that and it filters out the games, like one of the games I got on there was Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition. And that was just a report of, hey, this game works out of the box using this version of Proton.
Wow.
So what they'll do is when you enable that, they'll use those defaults. So like it'll default to that version of Proton when you tell it to install and run.
Oh, very nice. Yeah.
So a lot of the little tweaking that you would normally do in like Steam or Steam OS or any of those kind of to tell it to run specific versions of Proton, or if you're using like Glorious Eggroll or whatever, it does all that in the background and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that is cool, and that needs to be. Yeah, somebody needs to be doing that, maintaining some kind of list where they know which version it's actually going to work properly on. Because I've done that a dozen times with the title. Is like try to find which version it's actually going to work with. Mm-hmm. It's like the fourth or fifth one you try, and then But Well, I had a question for you. Now I've actually forgotten my question. That's not good. But yeah, interesting stuff there as far as that operating system goes. But I think, let's see what the time is. Yeah, I think I'm about ready to wrap it up over here. So thank you again so much for coming back. And actually, this is a redo of episode 41 because we recorded it once, like a couple weeks ago, I guess.
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago, probably.
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago, and I didn't get your audio, and so yeah. But I appreciate you coming back and doing the interview again. This is awesome, man.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Glad to be on. Appreciated the time.
Let's talk about your YouTube channel. That is a Dark1, DARK number 1. And where else can people find you online?
You can find me on the evil of Twitter for those that want to get into an argument. Let's go. You can find me there at Dark, the number 1 LTG is where you can find me. You can also find me on the YouTubes at Dark1 Linux Tech and Gaming.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can join me on Locals at LibreQuest.locals.com, where I'll be posting exclusive interviews, some of my music, and other things, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about as well. For other ways to support me, you can visit LibreQuest.org, that's LibreQuest.org, and thank you for being a listener. Until next time, I'm Matt, and this is LibreQuest.